you know that he has a record of 4-6, but we're gonna go ahead and make that 3-6 because the game against the 10.
Yeah.
No. Doesn't count.
Yeah. Yes, it does. No, it don't, man. Yes, it does. No, it don't.
Well, should it have counted? Now, most people who hop into the comments section of these videos will typically point out one very definite fact, that being that if he had lost, it absolutely would have counted. And that seems like an unfair double standard to sort of establish that if he wins, it doesn't count, if he loses, it does. And there is absolutely some truth to that, but I'm going to push back a little bit and suggest that there are times where you can have that scenario be justified. It's typically accepted or expected, even if it's not explicitly written out, that we expect players to play people that are roughly in their league. That is to say, if Messi beats his dog in a game of soccer or something to this effect, it doesn't get really full credit. So in this case, if you're playing a kid who's barely just hit their double-digit years, like come on, then it really shouldn't count as a win. But if you lose, it demonstrates that you are not as good as we thought you are, and therefore you are in the same league as the kid, because how would they have beaten you if they weren't? And so therefore it actually does count. But then this introduces some other problems, because what about the other direction? What about the players who are much better than Flight and therefore out of his league in the other direction? Did I say light rather than Flight? We're sticking with it. There's some people who are outside of Flight's league in the other direction that maybe when he loses to them it shouldn't count, and thus begins the messiness, and we are going to get into that
6 years ago, Flight played Devontae Frigga in a one-on-one. Now, Frigga at the time was not half the player that he would become, say, 4 years later, but I think that most any sane individual would concede that Flight had essentially no chance of winning that game. In fact, the chance of Flight losing to the kid might have actually been higher than his chance of winning that game, implying, therefore, that the respective gaps between those players, that being Flight and the kid and Frigga and Flight, might actually have a larger gap between Frigga and Flight. And if that's the case, and we're applying the sort of logic that you have to play someone within your league for the game to count, does that mean that Flight's loss to Frigga should be wiped from his record? Rarely do you see in conversations about Flight this sort of discussion about records. Do you see a positive outlook for Flight, wherein many losses would be wiped, because quite frankly, he's played some good players. And to be even more frank, he's really bad enough that a lot of them, if you were to be really critical, might end up outside of his league.
Perhaps you will argue to me that you should be able to punch up, but you shouldn't be able to punch down. This makes a lot of sense in terms of a sort of incentive structure, because we don't want someone going to play an indefinite supply of 4-year-olds to then boost their record to infinity and beyond. Whereas if they played a bunch of people out of their league in the sense that they were better than them, well then in that case you would only be adding an indefinite supply of losses, and there's no real reason for anyone to do that. But this is kind of just a practical way to view things, and you're sort of arguing this should be correct in lieu of what it would bring about incentive-wise, but it's not actually a very fair metric for judging the person's record. I mean, it still is ultimately quite one-sided, and in fact, it's quite punitive of the person who is seeking out higher challenges. If you're going to count those as losses, but not the other way around, that also has negative incentives, and again, in terms of pure fairness of how we should judge someone's record, it's just punitive of the kind of person that you don't want to be punitive of. So what is the answer? Well, we've kind of arrived at the place where you have to be consistent. If he loses to someone outside of his league, and you count that, then you also have to count his wins over someone under his league. So that leaves us in a place where you either have to say that both count or neither count. I personally would lean a little bit more towards saying that both count, including his victory over the kid. I know people take some umbrage with that, but at the end of the day, it's not really an official league where we're setting up like future careers and all those things, and people's livelihoods depend on this. We're kind of just getting a gauge of his record, who he's beaten, who he's lost to, and truly, if you were to analyze it consistently and be logical about it, you can't really dismiss that kid game if you're going to count the ones where he loses to players that are so clearly better than him. if you're gonna vibe check, you have to vibe check in both directions. So to put it, I guess, out front and conclusively, yeah, his win over that kid counts.